Hello lovely people, welcome to Food with Feeling. My name is Britta and today I'm going to be telling you all about tofu. Now I feel like people fall into one of two categories when it comes to tofu. They either love it or they have really weird negative connotations about it. And I was in the second category for the longest time. But now I am completely in love with tofu and I'm excited to share with you some of my favorite recipes that have made me fall in love with it. Okay, before we dive into any of these recipes, I would first like to talk about exactly what tofu is, as well as all the different kinds that you can buy and show you how to prep and cut tofu. Tofu is a soy-based product that's rich in iron and calcium and an amazing source of protein. It comes in a variety of different kinds ranging from silken tofu to firm and extra firm tofu. I almost always use extra firm tofu and that is what you are seeing in these shots. It holds its form great and really absorbs flavors and just generally tastes great. There's also silken tofu, which you see here. It does not hold its form nearly as well, which is fine. It's meant to be silky and it's great in smoothies. I've seen people use it in pies. And as you see here, it really fell apart when I was taking it out of the container, but that's fine. For all of the recipes that I'm going to be making for you today, I will be using extra firm tofu. I just love how well it holds its form and it tastes great. To prep this, we will cut open the packaging and then drain out all of the excess liquid from the package. Then we're going to get a rimmed baking sheet to put our tofu press on. If you don't have a tofu press or you just don't feel like buying one, I totally understand. I will show you how to press tofu without this in just a moment. But for now, we're going to use the tofu press, which is essentially just two pieces of plastic, sometimes different kinds of material, with some screws to tighten the tofu down. We're going to place that on our rimmed sheet. Any sheet or plate with a rim will work, and then slide our tofu on in. You can kind of see that they have markers on there to help you get the tofu nice and centered. And then we will tighten the screws down. I usually tighten it a decent bit, leave it for 10 minutes, and then tighten it just a bit more so I can get out as much of the moisture as possible so that the tofu cooks very nice and evenly. As you will see, I'm really getting a lot of the moisture out of this. I've measured it before and I typically get about 1/3 to 1/2 cup of excess moisture out of my tofu. And as you can imagine, that makes a huge difference in how it cooks. If you don't have a tofu press, you can do this by cutting the tofu in half and then placing it on a kitchen towel and then wrapping it up in the towel to help absorb the moisture. Then I usually place a skillet on top of the tofu evenly and then weigh it down with whatever large heavy object I can find, coconut oil or cans, and then it gets a ton of the moisture out. Now let's go over how to cut the tofu. To do this, I take my block of tofu and either cut it in half or into 3 even sheets, depending on what I'm gonna do with it. So let's cut it into triangles. To do this, I make 3 even sheets and I take each sheet and I cut from corner to corner across and then kind of hamburger, hot dog style across again as well. This results in 4 even and cute little tofu triangles that are perfect for frying. I will show you how to do that in just a minute. Now we will cube the tofu by taking one of those sheets of tofu and cutting it across horizontally and then vertically to get these nice little tofu cubes. I do these bigger or smaller depending on how I'm going to cook them and what I'm serving them with. And finally, I'm going to show you how to make these tofu rectangles. It's pretty straightforward. You probably don't need me to tell you how to do it, but I just cut them evenly across and these are great for grilling. Now let's cook up our tofu. I'm going to start by showing you how to saute tofu, which is probably the easiest and quickest way to cook tofu. It only requires 2 simple ingredients, an oil of choice, I typically use olive oil, and pressed tofu. So we're going to start by slicing our tofu into 3 even sheets, like I showed you earlier. And then we're going to cube it into small chunks. I like doing small cubes because they just cook more evenly and quicker. We're going to pour about a tablespoon of oil into our skillet, making sure that the whole skillet is covered, and then spread our cubes of tofu out evenly in a single layer. The key with this recipe is not to move the tofu at all for about 4 to 5 minutes so that it can form a really nice golden brown crust on the bottom of the tofu. Then you can flip it and make sure that it's cooked to that same evenness on all sides. There's really no limit to how you serve this sauteed tofu. In this particular instance, I tossed it with a really delicious creamy tahini sauce and then just served it over rice with some green onion. I often saute some veggies to put on the side, but there are so many different ways that you can use this sauteed tofu, and I have a lot of ideas for you on my blog today. Okay, let's fry up some tofu. The method for doing this is very similar to sauteing tofu, except that we're going to use quite a bit more oil. By using more oil, you get a really golden brown, crispy crust, very similar to a chicken nugget as you see here. To do this, we're going to first start by cutting our tofu into triangles like we went over earlier. Then we're going to add a hefty amount of oil to our skillet. Once the oil is shimmering and hot, you will add your tofu triangles right into the hot skillet. I like the oil to come about halfway up each tofu triangle. For this, we're going to fry these for about 4 to 5 minutes on each side so that you get this really nice golden crust. Then you'll transfer them to a paper towel lined plate so that it will absorb some of that excess oil. Here I topped these with just a little bit of flaky sea salt and some green onions, but I often make fried tofu to put in stir fries, or I will just toss it in a really yummy sauce. There's so many different ways that you can do this, and it's one of my favorite ways to enjoy tofu, is nice and crispy like this. Next up, we're going to make this ridiculously delicious and crispy baked tofu. This is one of my favorite ways to make tofu because I just love how crunchy and delicious it is. To do this, we're going to take one of those thin sheets of tofu and slice it into small cubes, very similarly to how we did when we sauteed the tofu. We'll put those in a bowl and top with some olive oil and a couple tablespoons of cornstarch. Then you can season this however you would like, depending on what you're going to serve it with. Then just toss that all together and then place the cubes of tofu on a baking sheet to bake for about 15 minutes. After that, we will flip it and bake it for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. I am seriously obsessed with how crispy this tofu turns out, and I love to serve this with stir fries and even just eat it on its own. Next up, I'm going to show you how to make this really fun and delicious tofu scramble. If you've never had a tofu scramble, I'm really excited for you to try this recipe. We're going to start out by taking our pressed block of extra firm tofu and breaking it into large chunks. We will break these chunks up more in the skillet as it cooks, so don't worry too much about how big or small the chunks are now. Heat some olive oil in a skillet and then add in the chunks of tofu. We will season this with some turmeric, a bit of garlic powder, as well as some onion powder, and then add in some salt and some freshly cracked black pepper. Then we're just going to cook this, again, continuing to break up the chunks of tofu as we go. The tofu's already cooked, so all we're really doing is just heating it through. As you'll see, the turmeric gives the tofu scramble a really fun yellow color that mimics the look of scrambled eggs. Then I just added on a little more pepper and some chives. I like to serve my tofu scrambles with some avocado and a little bit of hot sauce just to keep it simple. This scramble makes for a super quick and easy breakfast, and I am really excited for you to give it a try. Now let's make grilled tofu. People are always very skeptical of this recipe, but I worked on this for a long time and have formulated the most foolproof tofu grilling recipe. First, we're going to press our tofu as we have been doing. Then we're going to make a marinade by combining soy sauce, some olive oil, as well as some apple cider vinegar, garlic powder, liquid smoke, which is optional, some salt, and some freshly cracked black pepper in a container, and then whisk that all together. Then we'll prep our tofu like I showed you earlier by slicing it into thin slices and then placing that in the marinade so that it is coated on all sides. You can put the tofu in the marinade to marinate for a couple of hours or even overnight. Once your tofu has marinated for a bit, it is ready to pop on the grill. I like to put mine on diagonally so it gets these really pretty grill marks, and I cook it for about 10 minutes on each side. I almost always throw some summer veggies on there as well, some squash and some bell peppers, just whatever you can find at the store. This part is optional, but I like to add the leftover marinade into a saucepan with some cornstarch just to thicken it up a bit to top on the tofu later. So that's it. That's grilled tofu. It's so ridiculously easy, really tasty. I top it with that thickened marinade sauce. And I feel like this recipe is great to take to a barbecue when you don't want to be the only one not contributing something to the grill. Last but not least, we are going to make tofu in the air fryer. I was sent this really awesome Skinny Taste air fryer, which I highly recommend. But since I didn't have my own air fryer tofu recipe yet, I am using a really delicious recipe from Lindsay over at the Toasted Pine Nut. I will link to her recipe as well as her YouTube channel down in the description. We will start by cubing our tofu into large cubes. Then in a container, we're going to combine some cornstarch, some salt, as well as some garlic powder, cumin, and paprika. Whisk all of those seasonings together so that they're nice and combined, and then we will add the cubes of tofu into the container. Then we'll put on the top and give it a really good shake. You want to make sure that every single piece of tofu is as best covered in the seasoning as you possibly can get it so that it cooks nice and evenly with an even flavor to it. Then we will spray the inside of our air fryer dish with some cooking spray and then add the tofu in a single layer on the bottom of the pan. Then we'll add the basket of the air fryer back into the base and set it at 350 degrees for 10 minutes to start out. After that, you will flip the tofu and then bake it for about another 10 to 15 minutes. In her recipe, she shows you how to make this really delicious sauce. I will link to that down in the description. I made that and tossed it with my air fried tofu. Guys, this was so ridiculously delicious, and I am definitely adding this into my regular tofu routine. I ate all of this all by myself, and I'm really excited to make it again. So again, I will leave Lindsay's recipe down in the description, and you should definitely go check out her blog and her YouTube channel. So that's actually all I have for you today on tofu. I hope you learned a little bit and some new ways to try tofu. If you want some more recipes with different flavorings and ways to season the tofu and meals to serve it with, I have a ton of them on my blog, so you can click over to that down in the description as well. You can find the instructions to all of these tofu recipes on my blog, which I will link in the description box. I will also link a few of my favorite tofu recipes with some advice on how to season them and meals to serve these tofu recipes with. Please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more awesome recipes just like this one. I'm actually planning to do a very similar video to this, but using tempeh. I love tempeh, maybe even more than tofu, and I'm excited to make that video for you.